The Galactic Warlords, an empire known for its ruthlessness and technological superiority, had long believed that humans were insignificant, barely worth noticing. Their empire stretched across galaxies, crushing any opposition with ease. To them, humanity was no different from the countless other species they had encountered. They were fragile, weak, and predictable. But when a lone human scout, part of a reconnaissance mission, found himself captured, the warlords thought little of him. He was just one more weakling, a pawn to be discarded. The scout had been part of a mission to monitor warlord activity in the outskirts of known space. He had crashed on an uncharted planet after his ship was hit by enemy fire. Despite the crash, he managed to survive, injured but not broken. The warlords seized him quickly. The scout's survival instinct was sharp, but they easily overpowered him. He was no match for their advanced technology and superior numbers. With the scout in their custody, they planned to extract information about human military movements and defenses. They threw him into a cell, believing that the human would crack under the pressure. They were wrong. Under the harsh lights of their interrogation chamber, the scout refused to break. They began with the usual methods: psychological torment, physical torture, but he remained unfazed. They taunted him, calling him weak and insignificant, but the scout said nothing. His silence unnerved them. The warlords were accustomed to crushing their enemies' spirits, but the scout's resilience only fueled their frustration. They tried to break him with threats, but his defiance was unwavering. As days passed, the warlords grew increasingly desperate. They couldn't understand why he refused to speak. It was as if he knew something they didn't. They tried to appeal to his fear of death, promising him that if he cooperated, they would spare him. But the scout merely stared at them, unblinking. Then, a breakthrough came, though not in the way the warlords expected. As the scout lay in his cell, battered but still alive, he managed to send a final transmission. It wasn't a plea for mercy, as they had anticipated. Instead, it was a message that would shake the foundations of their empire. The scout's words were confident, calm, and full of defiance. Humanity is coming for you. We don't bow. We don't break. You've underestimated us, and that's your downfall. The warlords listened to the transmission in stunned silence. The message wasn't what they expected. There was no fear in his voice, no desperation. It was a challenge, a declaration that humanity had the will to fight back. The scout had used his final moments to convey more than just a warning. He had instilled in them the seed of doubt, something the warlords had never felt before. The scout's message spread beyond the warlords' fleet, intercepted by other factions. On Earth, his transmission was decoded and immediately broadcast across human space. The message ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had long suffered under the warlords' tyranny. It wasn't just a warning, it was a call to arms. Humanity was not the weak, insignificant species the warlords had believed. They were stronger than the warlords had ever imagined, and their ability to inspire rebellion was their true power. The warlords, who had long believed themselves invincible, found themselves shaken. The scout's transmission had done more than warn Earth, it had inspired a galactic rebellion. Alien factions that had been oppressed by the warlords saw the strength of human resolve and joined the fight. The warlords realized that humanity's spirit was more dangerous than any weapon they could wield. It wasn't the scout's technology or physical strength that had made him a threat, it was his unyielding defiance. Across the galaxy, the spark of rebellion grew. Human forces, united by the scout's words, began to push back against the warlords' empire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they fought with a determination that the warlords could not understand. The scout's final transmission became the rallying cry for all those who had suffered under the warlords' rule. As the rebellion gathered strength, the warlords realized the gravity of their mistake. They had thought of humanity as a simple, disposable species. Now they understood that the real danger was not their technology, but their capacity to inspire hope and defiance. The scout had become a symbol of that defiance, his message a beacon for all those who believed in freedom. The battle between the warlords and the rebels culminated in a final showdown. Despite the warlords' advanced weaponry, They could not overcome the united forces of the rebellion. The warlords, once thought to be invincible, were defeated. Humanity's strength, its refusal to be subdued, had brought down an empire. In the end, the Scout's legacy lived on. His final message had sparked a rebellion that changed the course of history. The warlords had underestimated humanity, and that was their downfall. The Scout's defiance proved that, no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how impossible the odds, humanity would always find a way to fight back. The Scout had given his life, but his message had ignited a fire that would never be extinguished. The warlords were relentless, a powerful empire that dominated the galaxy with unparalleled force. They had crushed civilizations, obliterated rebellions, and ruled with an iron fist. To them, humanity was nothing more than a nuisance. A tiny species, weak in comparison to the might of their empire. The capture of a lone human scout, sent to gather information on their fleet, was considered a minor victory. The warlords believed he would break easily, that he would be no more than a pawn in their game. The scout was detained in a high-security cell, isolated from the rest of the universe. The warlords thought their interrogation methods would be enough to extract valuable intelligence. They assumed that under enough pressure, the scout would crack, revealing everything from Earth's defenses to its military plans. But they were wrong. Days passed. The scout was tortured physically, mentally, and emotionally, but he never spoke. His face remained stoic, his eyes sharp, never showing any fear or weakness. The warlords grew frustrated, realizing that this human was not like others they had encountered. The standard techniques of fear and pain did not work on him. They tried every approach, from starvation to psychological manipulation, but the scout remained silent, stubbornly resistant. It wasn't until one of the warlords, a cold and calculating figure, realized something: the human was not afraid. They had expected him to plead, to beg for mercy, but instead, he kept his dignity. His silence seemed to mock them, to call their authority into question. They had thought of humanity as fragile and weak, but now they began to wonder. Could it be that this human wasn't afraid of dying? Could he be more resilient than they had anticipated? The scout's refusal to speak didn't break them, but it planted a seed of doubt. They had expected to crush him, to dominate him, and instead, they found themselves at a crossroads. Their empire had always thrived on power and control, but now they realized they might be facing something far more dangerous, a species that didn't fear death, that could endure pain without losing their resolve. And then, just as they were about to begin their most extreme interrogation tactics, the scout did something unexpected. He managed to send out a transmission. It wasn't a plea for mercy, nor was it a desperate cry for help. The message, intercepted by the warlords, was not a sign of weakness but a final declaration. A bold, defiant message from a species they had underestimated. "Humanity is coming for you," the message declared, with unwavering conviction. "You cannot win. We don't surrender. We don't bow. We will fight until the end. The spark has already begun." The warlords, who had thought of humanity as nothing more than an easy target, now found themselves shaken. The message didn't contain vital military secrets or tactical information. It was a declaration of strength, a challenge to their empire. The scout, in his final moments, had conveyed a truth they weren't ready to accept: humanity would not lie down and die. It would resist. It would fight. The transmission wasn't just a warning, it was a spark that ignited something far larger than the warlords could have imagined. The scout's message spread beyond the warlords' fleet, reaching human forces across the galaxy. Earth's forces, previously scattered and disorganized, now united under the banner of defiance. The warlords' empire, which had once been invincible, was beginning to unravel. The scout had achieved what no one thought possible. He had shown the galaxy that humanity was not just a target to be wiped out but a force to be reckoned with. His final transmission did not just speak to Earth, it spoke to every oppressed species, every civilization that had suffered under the warlords' rule. The message wasn't just about warning others of the impending invasion, it was a call to arms, a rallying cry to rise up against tyranny. The warlords were left to confront the consequences of their arrogance. The Scouts' death had become the catalyst for a movement that they could not stop. Across the galaxy, resistance groups formed, united by the belief that humanity's strength was not in their military might but in their ability to inspire others. The warlords had never considered this possibility, and now, they were caught in a battle on multiple fronts. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Human fleets joined forces with alien species who had suffered under the warlords' oppressive rule. The Scouts' message had planted the seeds of revolution, and now the galaxy was on the brink of war. The warlords, who had once thought themselves untouchable, now found their empire fractured and vulnerable. The transmission was only the beginning. Humanity's fight was not just for survival, it was for the soul of the galaxy. With each passing day, the resistance grew stronger, united by the belief that they could defeat the seemingly invincible warlords. The Scout, though dead, had sparked something much larger than himself. His legacy would live on in the hearts of all those who had been inspired by his final words. The warlords' grip on the galaxy was slipping, and they had no idea just how powerful the human spirit could be. The Scout had not just given his life, he had given the galaxy something far more important: hope. And in the end, that would be the warlords' undoing. The warlords were stunned. They had anticipated that the Scouts' final transmission would be a desperate plea, a moment of weakness. Instead, it was a bold proclamation that cut through their expectations like a blade. The human didn't beg for his life. He didn't crumble under their torture. He offered only defiance. "Humanity is coming for you," he had said. "You will regret underestimating us." The warlords replayed the transmission, dissecting every word. They had believed that humanity was no more than a passing nuisance in the grand scale of the galaxy, a species too weak and too fragmented to pose any real threat. But the message, full of unwavering confidence, challenged that belief. The Scouts' words stirred something they had never experienced: uncertainty. They realized that it wasn't just the human's survival instinct that set him apart. It was his ability to inspire something far more dangerous: hope. The warlords' empire had built itself on fear. They controlled through overwhelming force, crushing all who resisted. The idea that a single human, even a dying one, could provoke such a response was anathema to everything they knew. The Scout had not just sent a message to Earth, he had ignited a spark across the galaxy. His words were not a simple warning but a rallying cry, a challenge to every oppressed species under warlord rule. Humanity, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, had shown that it would not cower. Across human-controlled space, the message spread like wildfire. Resistance movements that had been simmering for years began to organize. The Scouts' declaration gave them the courage to act. Earth, once vulnerable and on the brink of conquest, now stood united. The human spirit, unbroken by the warlords' tactics, began to rally entire factions to their cause. The Scout, in his final moments, had done what none of their military leaders had thought possible: he had united the galaxy. The warlords, now facing a growing rebellion they had underestimated, scrambled to respond. They attempted to discredit the transmission, insisting it was nothing more than the dying words of a lone scout. But the message had taken on a life of its own. It was more than a warning, it was a declaration of war. Alien species that had long suffered under the warlords' rule now saw humanity as a beacon of resistance. They rallied to the cause, offering ships, technology, and soldiers. Together they formed an alliance that the warlords had never anticipated. The rebellion grew stronger by the day. The warlords, who had once controlled entire star systems, now found their fleets stretched thin, their resources dwindling. The Scouts' final transmission had opened a door they couldn't close. The warlords were no longer fighting just humanity, they were fighting a united front of oppressed civilizations, all united under one banner: defiance. The warlords, trapped by their own arrogance, were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The Scout had shown them that their empire was not as unbreakable as they had believed. It was fragile, held together by fear and power, but that power was beginning to fracture. Humanity, once seen as weak and insignificant, was proving to be their greatest adversary. The very thing the warlords had dismissed, the strength of the human spirit, was now the catalyst for their downfall. As the rebellion advanced, human forces led the charge, inspiring not only Earth but the very species that had once been enslaved by the warlords. The warlords realized that their empire's greatest vulnerability wasn't their technology, nor their armies. It was their inability to understand the power of a united will. They had underestimated the sheer willpower of the human race. What they had perceived as the Scouts' final act of defiance was, in truth, the birth of an unstoppable movement. In the final confrontation, the warlords were confronted with the full force of the rebellion. The human forces, bolstered by their newfound allies, launched a devastating offensive. The warlords' fleets, once thought invincible, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers and a determination that the warlords could not comprehend. The very essence of their empire, fear and control, collapsed under the weight of the unity that the Scout had inspired. The warlords had been brought to their knees, defeated not by superior technology, but by the power of hope and unity. The Scout's final transmission had shown them that humanity, despite its apparent weakness, could not be broken. His message had spread beyond the confines of his own species. It had inspired an entire galaxy to stand against tyranny. The warlords were no longer the dominant force they once were, and their empire was in ruins. In the aftermath of the rebellion, humanity and its allies celebrated their victory. The Scout's death had not been in vain. His words had sparked a fire that would burn for generations. The galaxy would never be the same. The warlords had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. The legacy of the Scout would live on, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit would never yield. The rebellion was in full force. The warlords, who had once ruled the galaxy with unchallenged dominance, now found themselves on the defensive. The spark that the human Scout had ignited with his final transmission had grown into an unstoppable inferno. Humanity, with the help of their new allies, launched coordinated attacks on the warlords' fleet, slowly but surely dismantling their empire. The warlords, in their arrogance, had underestimated the strength of unity, the power of hope. They had thought themselves invincible, and now they were paying the price. Humanity's victory wasn't achieved through superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was achieved through determination, a refusal to back down in the face of insurmountable odds. The Scout's message had been more than just a warning. It was the symbol of humanity's resolve, the proof that even the smallest and most suppressed species could rise up and change the course of history. The warlords had thought their enemies would scatter, but instead, they united in a cause greater than themselves. The warlords' forces, now fragmented and disorganized, scrambled to maintain control. The very systems they once held in a vice grip began to slip from their control. As human forces and their allies closed in on key strategic points, the warlords' leaders became frantic. Their attempts to counter the rebellion fell short at every turn. The human spirit, driven by the Scout's final words, proved to be more powerful than any weapon in their arsenal. The warlords tried to fight back with everything they had, unleashing devastating weapons, deploying their best soldiers, and attempting to crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. But they could not stop the tide. The sheer willpower of the alliance they had underestimated proved to be the warlords' greatest downfall. As the days passed, more and more planets joined the resistance, offering ships, resources, and manpower. The warlords were left struggling to maintain their grip, while the alliance grew ever stronger. In a final, desperate move, the warlords attempted to rally their forces for a last stand. They gathered what was left of their fleets and prepared to launch a full-scale counterattack. They had hoped to crush the rebellion once and for all, to remind the galaxy of their power. But they were too late. By the time they mobilized, the rebellion had already reached their heart. Earth's forces, bolstered by the bravery and determination of their allies, struck the warlords where it hurt the most, at the center of their empire. The battle was fierce. The warlords threw everything they had into it, but it wasn't enough. Their fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, was now overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and relentless will of the resistance. The final blow came when a human-led fleet, with the support of their alien allies, broke through the warlords' defenses, taking control of their capital. The warlords, in their final moments, were forced to acknowledge what they had never believed possible. Humanity had not only survived their wrath, it had defeated them. The warlords' empire collapsed almost overnight. The forces that had once crushed entire civilizations were now reduced to nothing. The leaders of the rebellion, with Earth at the forefront, celebrated their victory, but they knew that the fight had only just begun. The warlords' downfall had opened a new chapter in the galaxy's history. The Scout, though long dead, had given the galaxy something priceless: the realization that no empire, no matter how powerful, could ever truly conquer a united and determined people. As the dust settled and peace began to take root across the galaxy, the human spirit remained unshaken. The victory over the warlords was not just a military triumph, it was a reminder to all that the power of unity, hope, and defiance could never be extinguished. The Scout, in his final transmission, had set the galaxy on a new course. His message had inspired not just a rebellion, but a new way of thinking, a belief that no matter how oppressive the rulers, no matter how hopeless the situation, humanity would always rise. His legacy was the beginning of a new era, one where the strength of the human will would shape the future of the galaxy. The warlords were gone. Their empire was no more. But the galaxy would never forget the lesson humanity had taught, that no force in the universe could ever fully subdue a species that refused to surrender. The Scout's final transmission had ensured that the human spirit would live on, unbroken forever.